Alrighty, folks, we are live on Facebook. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody else except Robert. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. Welcome to Refracted Light Presents. For those of you who came by way of our Facebook group, thank you so much for being a part. And just wanted to welcome you all tonight to another evening of esoteric or Masonic or spiritual education. We don't put names on things here, and we don't focus on titles and lapel pins and what color apron you have on. So we're here mostly about education. So with that, I'm going to quickly introduce our speaker for the evening. His name is Brother Robert Staffieri. He has been a Master Mason since 1993. He's a member of Temecula. Did I say that right?
Temecula Catalina Lodge.
Temecula Catalina Lodge in, I'm going to guess in Temecula, California.
Yes.
And he's also a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason from the Valley of San Diego and a member of the Massachusetts Grand Lodge Speaker Bureau. He also retired after 35 years working in the broadcasting industry at one of my favorite networks, the American Forces Network. So thank you for bringing television to me when I was overseas. Kudos there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and shut up and let Brother Robert do his thing.
Okay, thank you, Brother Martinez. My name is Robert Staffieri, as Brother Martinez said, and my presentation tonight is on Brother Manly P. Hall, Maestro of the Hermetic tradition. And I call him the Maestro of the Hermetic tradition because, in my opinion, that's what he was. He was the master. He was the master composer, as far as in my own opinion, in Freemasonry. And I'm going to cover his career. I'm going to cover his birth, his childhood, his introduction to the esoteric sciences, his spiritual journey, culminating with his famous works. I'm going to cover in detail 4 of his main works, in my opinion, his 4 best. Of course, I'm going to go over his other works too. And then we're going to go into his twilight years and also his significant contributions to the Brotherhood of Freemasonry. Before I go to that, I want to give you a brief background on my spiritual journey and what led me to this point in my life. I grew up in Philadelphia, and as a child, I spent my early childhood there. Around when I was 8 or 9, I moved to Los Angeles, California. I spent most of my early adult life there in my teenage years. I grew up during the 1970s. It was a good time, especially growing up in Southern California. And, like any young teenager or young man at that period, I had my share of parties. So basically, I grew up my childhood was from a Roman Catholic family. I always make a joke, since my father was Italian and my mother was Irish, I didn't really have much choice in the issue. And I cherish that background because that gave me a good foundation. The rituals in the Catholic Church actually basically got me ready for Freemasonry, to better understand Freemasonry. And I'm sure some of you know, especially the brothers in the room, that the Knights Templar was aligned with the Catholic Church and they're connected to us. So at one time in our history, we were actually as one. And but when I got older, I started questioning things, and I really wasn't getting any answers from religion. When I would ask my priest, what is the Garden of Eden about? It doesn't really make sense. It sounds like a fairy tale. And I was like 8 or 9 or 10 at this time, and I was very inquisitive. I questioned things. I wasn't satisfied with the company answer. And then also, what was Noah's Ark about? That kind of didn't make sense to me either. And I was usually told, well, that's a mystery. You don't need to know it. Well, I want to know the mystery. So at that time, in my late teens and in my childhood, I, read the astrology article in the newspaper and played the Ouija board and things like that, kind of light things in that nature. But when I started getting in my teens, especially when I started going to college my freshman year, I started getting a curiosity of where I was going, what my life meant, there was more to life than just having a good time, I thought. So anyway, at the time I was introduced, believe it or not, one of the friends I had in college, he was a punter on the football team. He was actually one of the best punters in the country at the time. And basically, he introduced me to the Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda. So anyway, I started getting into that, and at that time it was opening my understanding. It was, basically, I don't know if your brothers are familiar with that, but it's about Native American spirituality, and it started awakening my interest in more of the more avant-garde form of spirituality instead of mainstream religion spirituality. So from that, I went to Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda. That's a classic work. And then I started reading The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, the famous Sufi poet and writer, and also Herman Hesse's Siddhartha. And those 4 books were the core books that started me on my spiritual journey. Well, I was taking the journey east at that time, so to speak, into Eastern religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, Vedanta, Sikhism. And I started frequenting bookstores. One was Either Or Bookstore in Hermosa Beach, one of the big esoteric bookstores of the day. It's no longer there. And also the Bodhi Tree in LA, which is actually more popular. And in the Either Or Bookstore in Hermosa Beach, I came across Blavatsky, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's 2 works, The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled. The Secret Doctrine is more Eastern religion, and Isis Unveiled is more of the Western Hermetic tradition, Egyptian mythology. And of course, Secret Doctrine's their most famous work. So anyway from there, I started reading Krishnamurti. I started getting more exposed to more deeper mysteries, Rosicrucianism. And one day I visited the Walden Books in the Antelope Valley. I lived there in the 90s. And I came across a fellow secretary who I started talking to who worked there. And he said, "Hey, are you familiar with Manly P. Hall?" And I said, "No, I never heard of Manly P. Hall. What did he write?" And he goes, "Oh, Secret Teachings of All Ages." Right away, it came out of his mouth. And I said, "Secret Teachings of All Ages? Never heard of that book." He said, "You got to see it." He said, "You got to read it. It's the best spiritual book ever written. I mean, it's profusely illustrated. It covers all the mystery schools, all the Hermetic sciences, all the avant-garde esoteric stream of religion through history, and you gotta buy that book." So anyway, he said, "Let me order it for you." So he said, "If you don't like it, I'll buy it back from you. Okay, I make you that offer. If you don't like it, I will personally buy it back from you." So anyway, he ordered it, and about a week later, it came in. And understand, we're talking about the early 90s, 1990, I think, or 89. We didn't have Amazon back then. So when you went to a bookstore, if you saw something that wasn't there, you had to order it. So anyway, the book came in, and I got a call, not from him, but from somebody else, and the book arrived. So I went down there to pick it up that day. And I looked at it. I was immediately impressed by its magnitude and its depth and its thickness. And I looked through it, profusely illustrated. I mean, it was phenomenal, and everything it covered, and it was traditionally laid out. It was fantastic. So anyway, I asked, where is, I forget his name now. And he said, and the woman working there said, "Who?" And then I gave the name again. She goes, "I don't know of anybody that works here." And she checked, and she goes, "No, nobody by that name works here." So all of a sudden I started getting ethereal and started saying, "Well, is it some master of wisdom came through here and pointed me in this direction? Is there something like that going on?" So anyway, from there, I read the book, and I couldn't put it down. And then I visited the Philosophical Research Society, and I started going to lectures. Unfortunately, I didn't see Manly P. Hall when he was alive. I went there actually a few months after he passed away, and I started going to lectures there, and they were carrying on his tradition. And then all of a sudden, I noticed Freemasonry was in this book. That's what kind of was the foundation of the book. So all of a sudden, they say, you're a Mason in the heart before you became one. And at that point, I had this, hard to explain, it was a spiritual oneness and awareness that I found what I was seeking. Of all this journey and all this searching, all these years, I finally found it. And I wanted to become a Freemason. So I went to my local lodge, which is Palmdale Lodge, 769. And I started meeting with some of the brothers. I was talking to them. And I noticed a lot of them weren't as esoteric as me, but they were good men. And they were seeking to be better men like the rest of us on their own spiritual journey. So I petitioned, and I went through my degrees. And believe it or not, since I read Lost Keys of Freemasonry, I pretty much knew what I was in for. And that's my journey, and that's what brought me to this point. And I'm glad I got to share my personal story a little with you, so you'll better understand this presentation, my perspective on the presentation. Before I make the presentation, I just want to give my famous disclaimer here. I'm sure most of the brothers do. The opinions I express are my opinions alone and do not represent the Grand Lodge of California, any Grand Lodge, or Freemasonry in general. So I just want everybody to know that. So anyway, I'm ready to get on with the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you, brother. Okay. Can everybody see the full screen? You have a full screen image? Manly P. Hall, March 18th, 1901, August 29th, 1990.
Not yet, no.
Oh, nothing there, brother?
Nope.
No. All right. Let's see. Let's do this again. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, how about now?
Looks great.
Okay, good. Okay, you still see the full screen, right, brother?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, Manly P. Hall, or Manly Palmer Hall. That was his full name. He was born on March 18th, 1901, and passed to the great architect in the universe on August 29th, 1990. He was actually a Piscean, which I am, so we share that. And I'll go to his major accomplishments in my second slide. This is a composite of Brother Hall's major accomplishments in his life. He authored over 150 books and essays on Freemasonry, Kabbalah, Tarot, mystic Christianity, Rosicrucianism, Egyptian mythology, secret societies, and the Hermetic tradition. He delivered approximately 8,000 lectures in his lifetime on the ancient esoteric wisdom and Hermetic philosophy in the United States and abroad. He wrote numerous magazine articles and published journals in the All Seeing Eye, Horizon, and the PRS Journal. He wrote and released The Lost Keys of Freemasonry in 1923, over 30 years before he was initiated into the craft, which is pretty amazing, as you will see later in this presentation. He published The Secret Teachings of All Ages in 1928 at the age of only 27, which is amazing that he had all this knowledge at that young age. He founded the Philosophical Research Society, and it's still there today, in 1934 in Los Angeles, California. And near the conclusion of this presentation, I will touch a little on the mysterious circumstances that surrounded his death in 1990. As you can see, his work was prolific in his lifetime. It's hard to believe that he was able to do that great of a body of work in one single lifetime. Here are his Masonic affiliations. He was initiated on June 28, 1954 at Jewel Lodge number 374 in San Francisco. He passed away on September 20th, 1954 at Jewel Lodge number 374 in San Francisco. And then he was also raised on November 22nd, 1954 at the same lodge, Jewel Lodge 374 in San Francisco. He received his 32nd degree in 1955 at the Valley of San Francisco AASR Southern Jurisdiction. He was recognized as a 33rd degree Freemason on December 8, 1973 by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite at a ceremony held at the Philosophical Research Society, the organization he founded. He was a knight patron of the Masonic Research Group in San Francisco throughout his time up there in San Francisco as a Mason. And what's kind of surprising about Brother Hall never served in the East as a worshipful master in any lodge, nor as it appears in any officer capacity. His whole life was dedicated to the great work, and I think maybe he didn't want some of the exoteric responsibilities of Masonry to interfere with that. Manly's birth and early childhood. He was born on March 18, 1901 in Peterborough, Canada, a province of Ontario. He was a Canadian by birth. He never knew his father and was abandoned by his mother, Lewis Palmer Hall, when he was a young child. The research I've done on Hall, some people say his father left before he was born. Some say after he was born, but it was only a month or two before or a month or two after. He didn't have a father figure in his life, and that kind of made him go on the quest too to get some kind of foundation in his life, i.e., the spiritual journey. He was raised by his maternal grandmother, Florence Lewis Palmer. She was very instrumental in his life. And here you see a picture of Manly. Manly's on the right as a young child. He's probably about 6 or 7 there. And his grandmother is on the left, Florence Louise Palmer. He had no formal education and a generally unhealthy childhood. He wasn't a happy camper in his childhood. He was lonely. He didn't have a formal education. He was educated from home. And back then, that was kind of unheard of. He was raised in South Dakota, so it was more of a farm rural community. So probably in that part of the country, it might have been a little bit more popular. But in the cities and the urban areas, it was generally unheard of. And what's amazing, he had no formal education. There's no records of him even going to school at any time, even kindergarten. So that's kind of amazing in itself that he was able to write on such a scholarly level and leave such a prolific amount of work in his lifetime. His grandmother enrolled him in a military academy for 2 years at the age of 15. She wanted Manly to be around young men his own age because he just had a connection with her and with some of his closer relatives. And they were older people. They weren't kids his own age or even young adults. And the grandmother thought he needed that kind of bonding with other young men. It didn't last too long. It lasted 2 years because Manly was kind of a gentle kind of kid, a gentle soul. And he kind of, was kind of a little bit of a macho environment for him. But he did take away from it a little bit as far as the bonding with young men. So in the long run, it actually proved beneficial in his life. He was influenced by his grandmother's search for deeper knowledge. His grandmother had a very prolific Masonic library with works from William Wilmshurst and Albert Mackey and A.E. Waite. And he started reading those books. He started getting hungry for that knowledge as a young kid, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So he was on the path fairly early. And more detail on his parents. They divorced shortly after he was born. His father's name was William S. Hall. He was a dentist by profession. It was said that Manly never knew his father, like I explained previously. His mother was a chiropractor by profession, and she was a free spirit. She was what you would probably call like a hippie back in the 60s. And for that period, she wore her hair very long and flowing. And she wore a kind of clothing that was not the Victorian type clothing of that time. And she was kind of a little bit frowned on by so-called polite society during the day. She was a musician and a spiritual seeker. She was deeply into Rosicrucian teachings. She moved to Southern California shortly after Manly's birth. And then she became involved with an organization called the Rosicrucian Fellowship. Its location in Ocean, California. It's still there today. It's still a functioning fellowship. They have services. They have discussions on Sundays. And it's a membership. And I impress upon everybody, if they're ever in the area, to go visit it after COVID passes us and it's safe to do so. It's closed for visitors right now, but I mean, it's a great place to see. One of the temple is a historical landmark, and it would be they have a great spiritual walk and a cactus kind of garden and a meditation area. It's a very good experience. She gave Manly to his maternal grandmother to be raised before she departed to California to continue her spiritual journey. As a child with his grandmother, Manly grew up in South Dakota, as I mentioned. He only had a few childhood friends, like I mentioned, and was exclusively associated with adults. His grandmother took him around the Midwest to visit the great libraries. He visited libraries and museums in major cities such as Chicago and Detroit. And there he went right to the esoteric and religions section and ancient mythology section, started reading these books as a young child and a young, teenager. And he was kind of on his path early, so to speak. Um, in This slide is called California Dreamin', from the song, actually. In 1919, Hall moved to Los Angeles to be reunited with his birth mother after his grandmother had died suddenly while he was working as a clerk for a Wall Street firm in New York City. As a young man, he went 18 years old. He went to work in Wall Street. He was thinking of being an investor in Wall Street and a trader, but he didn't have the nature for the business. It was a little too cutthroat for him. And he was getting close to quitting anyway. But then his grandmother died suddenly, and it left basically Manley with no anchor in his life. He really was almost like homeless. He had no place to live. His only means of support as a young man during that days, and he had a meager salary working as a clerk on Wall Street. He was just a beginning clerk. He wasn't a major investor at that point. So basically, he was left alone, all alone. So at that time, he decided to head to California, to Southern California, where his mother was. He wanted to reunite with his mother. When he was there, he became involved with several theosophical and Rosicrucian esoteric groups. He became very influenced at that time by the writings of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a woman of a Russian noble birth. She's specifically her magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine. He started reading that, and he became very involved in theosophy at the time. That was a big interest with him, and that was interest he kept for the rest of his life. And a lot of his writings and teachings were based on theosophical doctrine. Like I said, he was drawn to Southern California due to the esoteric current of the area in the 1920s. In the 1920s, Southern California was like the epicenter or the Mecca spirituality, if not United States, the world. And there were several esoteric organizations that were blossoming in Southern California during that period. You had the Theosophical Society in Pasadena. That was a branch of the Theosophical Society founded by Blavatsky. You had the Brotherhood of Light, now the Church of Light in Los Angeles, founded by C.Z. Zane. That's still around, as is the Theosophical Society in Pasadena, which now they call Altadena. He had the United Lodge of Theosophists, the ULT in Los Angeles, started by Robert Crosby in 1909. And what that was to do, that was going to take, they were feeling that Theosophy was becoming a little too new agey. They were mixing other writers with Blavatsky and Judge's writings. So Crosby wanted to take Theosophy back to its original teachings and only teach from Blavatsky's writings and Judge's writings. So he founded the United Lodge of Theosophists. And the main building is a mammoth building. It's a magnitude and size, very impressive. It's in downtown Los Angeles. It's still there today. They have lectures and teachings and classes and everything there 7 days a week. Also, the Rosicrucian Fellowship in Oceanside, which I mentioned earlier, that was founded by Max Hindle in 1911. And also another branch of the Theosophical Society, the Theosophical Society in Point Loma, founded by Catherine Tingry from 1900 to 1942. Just like the Rosicrucian Fellowship, where the spiritual seekers actually lived and functioned and did their livelihood, the Theosophical Society in Point Loma, also the seekers lived there. And they had a great Greek theater where they viewed mystery plays. They had teachings that they were taught from Tingry and also Blavatsky and Judge there. And it was around till 1942 when they started having a military base there, and at that period, and Tingry thought it was becoming a little too militarized, that area, so she decided to pack up and go to the Netherlands at The Hague, and that's currently where the organization resides. Also, builders of the Adytum, or BOTA as it's commonly called, founded by Brother Paul Foster Case in 1922. It's still there today in the main office. Main temple is in Los Angeles. They have definitive, second to none correspondence course on the Tarot and the mystical Kabbalah, which is still available today to seekers, and I highly recommend it. I'm not a member of the BOTA, but if you want to really see authentic Tarot, and Paul Foster Case was a brother Freemason, by the way. If you want to study authentic Tarot and Kabbalah, that's the school to take it from. Hall studied at the Theosophical Reading Room in the bookstore and frequently visited the Rosicrucian Fellowship in Oceanside, in which his mother was a member and may have lived there for a short period. He was influenced by Augusta Voss Hindel, who was Max Hindel's widow, and he looked upon her as his spiritual guide and teacher, and they were very close during that period. He after that left the Rosicrucian Fellowship and started going on his own quest as a spiritual teacher. He started his speaking career in 1919 at the age of 18 in Santa Monica. His lecture was on reincarnation. The picture here, and I will magnify it on the bottom left, is a picture of the building he met at. He met at either second or third floor, not really sure on what floor. And it's a picture from about that period, maybe a little later. As you see, there's some Model T cars there, like early 1920s. So it's pretty relevant to that time period. It was on Blanchard Avenue. In late 1919, Hall was invited to give a lecture at the Church of the People, a liberal evangelical church in Los Angeles. And let me explain the word evangelical. Evangelical is not like evangelical today. Evangelical today is a form of very conservative Christianity. This was more of a progressive form of Christianity, and he was invited to give a lecture there. They were very impressed, as well as his lecture on reincarnation that he gave earlier at another place. The Progressive Fellowship, Religious Fellowship, met at Blanchard Hall. It was a building in downtown, and I just showed you that previously. Hall impressed them so much that he was ordained a minister on May 17, 1923. A few days later, he was elected the permanent pastor of the church. His first publications were two small pamphlets while he was preaching as a minister, lecturing as a minister at that church. They were called The Breastplate of the High Priest and Wands and Serpents. Breastplate of the High Priest was a short publication. It was talking about the sigils and the esoteric symbols on the breastplate of the high priest of Hebrew high priest of the temples of Jerusalem, and the esoteric interpretation of those symbols. And also Wands and Serpents. Compared the magical wand of the magician to the serpent, and the way the serpent powered divine wisdom was directed through that wand, i.e. in ceremonial magic. Also in the Bible, if you remember, the Pharaoh and Moses were involved in a duel, and Moses threw down his wand and it turned into a serpent, which, that's, esoterically allegorical. But it's in that story is in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Like I said, Hall's talks on reincarnation were compelling and received rave reviews. During that period, he started because it was considered a boy wonder by Angelinos. They were in awe of his speeches. They couldn't believe he had this knowledge at such a young man. We're talking 18, 19 years old at the time. He lectured on the ancient wisdom and how it could be utilized in solving the problems of the modern day. In other words, what he did is he used elements of theosophy and elements of the New Thought movement, which was big during this period, which is still big today. It became positive thinking and is a little watered down today. But William Walker Atkinson, he was one of the pioneers of that. And he basically combined these two. He took New Thought, which more or less didn't have a spiritual element, and put it into theosophy, which did have the spiritual element of the ancient wisdom. And he applied this to the problems of modern day. His lectures typically went approximately 90 to 120 minutes, and they were delivered without notes or a break. He just kept going. He was like a channel, and no break, no notes, everything was pronounced correctly. He was very articulate. And he really impressed the fellowship. his reference material was the occult and esoteric books he owned or borrowed from the Los Angeles Public Library. He had an air of confidence and superiority where he spoke, and he was a smooth, silver-tongued orator. Now here I'm coming to the first major publication of Manly P. Hall, and it was the precursor of Secret Teachings of All Ages. It kind of set the foundation, which was elaborated in and expanded in his magnum opus. It was the first major publication released in October 1922. It was described the path taken by the sons of flame through works and ruled by the element of fire. In Freemasonry, they call us the sons of Cain, which is the path of works. The sons of Seth are the church leaders, priests, bishops, popes, and they're taking the path of faith. Masons take the path of works, which is Freemasonry. The church leaders or Catholicism takes the path of faith. And this book focused on the path taken by the Sons of Flame through works. The book had an emphasis on the temple ornaments of the ancient mystery schools of initiation and the esoteric symbolism that defines the deeper significance of these implements. So a lot of these implements in this short book, it's only like 90 pages. You can read it in 2 hours. Very short paragraphs, very to the point, not much nuance. And basically, the implements and ornaments in this book, many of them are in our degrees of Freemasonry. And this, like I said, was the forerunner to Hall's more extensive and comprehensive The Secret Teachings of All Ages. This was Hall's introduction to the ancient wisdom philosophy. The illustrations were by J. Augustus Knapp, who was a famous artist of the period, who drew a lot of black and white artwork, kind of like Gustave Doré, if you're familiar with him. And Knapp and Doré are two of my favorites. He also later illustrated Lost Keys of Freemasonry and The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which he actually improved his art in those two books. Again, a focus on temple furniture and implements of the degree of ritual work of the secret societies of the ancient mystery schools. And I'm talking about the ancient mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, Rome, Persia, India. And some of the implements and ornaments were the cube altar, the pillars of the temple, which we're familiar of in Freemasonry, the serpent, the Holy Grail, and the 5-pointed star, which is the symbol of the Eastern Star, right? And it was a precursor to the Secret Teachings. In the last few pages of the book, he has a special emphasis on the two paths. There's the path of the White Grail, which we call the right-hand path. And the path of the White Grail is the path through service to mankind and your brothers and sisters, self-sacrifice, purification, love, and study. And by study, he means, esoteric study, religious study. The path of the left hand, which he calls the Black Grail, is the path of prosperity at others' expense, making money off others without caring about their welfare, selfishness, shortcuts, taking shortcuts on your road to riches and fame, master by appetite, gluttony, lust, greed, those kind of things. That's the Black Grail. And you taking that left-hand path, you might be doing well for a short time, but eventually karma catches up on you and your path ends in ruin and destruction. Then this is the next book he followed up with, called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, probably my second favorite book by Manly P. Hall. Initiates of the Flame is probably tied with my third. It was published in March 1923. He was still a very young man at this period. It's over 30 years prior to Hall being initiated into Freemasonry. In other words, Hall wrote this book 30 years before he even was allowed into a Masonic temple to be initiated. And it's unbelievable the knowledge he had. He never was in a temple. He might have knew people that were in the temple. I don't know. Of course, they were vowed to secrecy. But he had the knowledge of the degree work at that period, which is clearly amazing. It features illustrations by artist J. Augustus Knapp, again, the same artist in Initiates of the Flame. And it was recognized by many as the best esoteric interpretation of the three Blue Lights degrees, which I fully agree with. It is the best esoteric interpretation. I've read others too, but if you want an esoteric interpretation as compared to exoteric interpretation, this is the book you want to read. And I recommend it to all Masons, no matter how long you've been a Mason, because every time I read it, I learn something new. I'm going to go over a little part of it with my laser pointer here. And this will have a lot of significance to brothers that are in the Zoom meeting right now. As you see, there's the three pillars the candidate is progressing through. The black and white checkerboard pavement. Also the winding staircase, which brothers know about. And going up into the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum, the level of a Master Mason. On my right here, I have the initiate being risen in Egyptian Freemasonry. The Egyptians wore a head of a lion or a bear and some masculine strong animal, and they raised the candidate from the tomb, as you see here, and brothers will know that significance too. And here on the bottom, I have the cover of the original book called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. As you see, the high priest, the pharaoh, is standing on the temple, on the pyramid. As you see, the pyramid does not have the capstone. The capstone's removed. And just like all of us brothers in Masonry, we are Master Masons, but we really haven't obtained the full exalted level of being a Master Mason. Our temple isn't complete, and that's when the capstone is placed on the pyramid. So basically, you see the initiate of the mysteries, or the master standing on the pyramid, incomplete, but there to do his work. On your right bottom, you see the master slain with the three ruffians. Again, that has significance to Masters, Masons in the Zoom. I won't go into complete detail on it. When I'm saying you could get it on Google. So this is open to everybody. As you see, there's the three ruffians. In Hall's writings, the three ruffians represented avarice, greed, and envy, the three lower elements of man's cardinal nature, which basically destroys the master. It destroys the spiritual man. And that's what he looked as a third degree to be in symbolic of. And that's why I strongly recommend this book to all esoteric brothers and anybody that is a seeker of mystical knowledge. It's a great book to have in your library. You can get a copy on iBooks or Kindle for about 99 cents, $1.99, $2.99. So it's very affordable. This is a quote from Manly P. Hall from The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. Probably my favorite quote of Manly P. Hall. The true student realizes most of all that taking degrees does not make a man a Mason. A Mason is not appointed. He is evolved, and he must realize that the position he holds in the exoteric lodge means nothing compared to his position in the spiritual lodge of life. And I feel that way, and I'm sure most of my esoteric brothers do. It doesn't matter on whether you serve in the East 100 times. Don't get me wrong, it's very noble and commendable. And I really respect my brothers that have. But what matters is, or the degrees you have, or if you've been through the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, that really doesn't matter. What matters is how you treat your fellow human being and what you do to benefit and advance the spiritual evolution of mankind. That's what makes you a Mason. And I think that's the key to Masonry, personally. Now, after he was done with his two first great works, Initiates of the Flame and The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Manly wanted to for lack of a better term, step up his game. He wanted to basically go abroad and see these ancient rituals firsthand. So what he did is he decided to travel to the Far East and also to, Celtic Britain and, Germany, where the Rosicrucians originated, and all these other, and Rosslyn Chapel, and all these other esoteric sites. So he traveled the world, and during that time, he acquired a personal library of ancient literature through funding from the Lloyd family. Now, Carol and Estelle Lloyd, they were a mother and daughter who were members of a family which had oil interests in Southern California. They also were members of the Church of Truth, where Manly, where he made his lectures and his talks. And they had a very big interest in esotericism and during that day, like most people during this period, that were actually people that had quite a bit of wealth were very interested in the esoteric during this period. They had interest in the oil industry here, and basically, when I came to California in 1966 as a young child, there were still oil rigs throughout the South Bay where I lived, pumping oil 24/7, and I saw them all the time when I went to the store with my parents and everything. And basically, we were number two to Texas for oil production in the United States. We're not, of course, California's nowhere. We're not there anymore at all. The oil's all dried up. Texas still has limited oil. Most of it's from the Middle East, but we were pretty big in oil, even as late as I would say the late 70s. Probably still doing it. By 1980, it was all dried up. But even in the late 70s, I would see a rare oil rig once in a while. Hall's first trip commenced on December 5th, 1923, in which he studied the customs and religions of countries in Asia and Europe. In the early 1930s, later, he traveled to France and England, where he acquired an impressive collection of rare books and manuscripts. Carolyn Lloyd died in 1946, leaving Hall a house, cash, and oil shares. And she left him a phenomenal house, a Frank Lloyd house overlooking Los Angeles, multi-million-dollar estate today. It's kind of located where the Getty is, about that location. And you had, from that house, you had a panoramic view of Los Angeles, a house worthy Brother Hall statue. And if you're ever up at the Getty, and you see that view, that's basically what Manly had every night from his house. Hall also received $15,000 in cash and approximately $10,000 per year from oil shares for 38 years. Now, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of money today, but back during that period, it was a lot of money. The Lloyds donated millions of dollars to his projects and helped establish the Philosophical Research Society, or PRS, in the year 1934. So they were very influential to keep his work alive and keep it out there for other seekers to find and to spiritually grow from. Now here we come to Manly's magnum opus, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. This was his magnum opus, considered his signature work. It was published in 1928 when Hall was only 27 years of age. Hard to believe that a man that young had all this knowledge. The first two editions of 1,100 copies sold out in advance. And for an esoteric book during that period, that was quite a bit of copies, especially in advance, to be sold. Remember, this was an avant-garde book. This wasn't like The Secret or something like that. This was a very, very limited audience of serious spiritual seekers who were interested in this book. It is illustrated with 54 original full-color plates by J. Augustus Knapp. Again, the same artist. The artist there, again, for lack of a better term, stepped up his game. These are very beautiful illustrations, and I'll go into them shortly. Hall researched records and previous publications on esotericism in the New York City Public Library and British Museum. The New York City Public Library was his major source for research in writing secret teachings. The book was actually published by Manly himself. He wanted complete control of publishing the book because he didn't want it cheapened or shortcuts made. He wanted it to be remembered and something that we would still be talking about today, which we are. The book actually sold through word of mouth and through advertising, specifically through his publication, The All-Seeing Eye, which was a newspaper that he published from the Church of Truth during that period, his first newspaper type publication. Hall was able to secure enough funding to finance the first printing from the people of the Church of Truth and other people that had an esoteric interest in Los Angeles area. His first printing through advance orders sold out very quickly. The first print editions were sold for $75 on a pre-publication basis, but the final cost upon delivery is understood to be closer to $100. Now remember, this is $75 in 1928. This is not now. $75 for a hardcover book or $100 for would be actually a lot of money even today. But back then, you know, we're talking, I think Brother Martinez came up with it when I originally talked to him about this. I think it was almost something like over $1,000 or something. So that was pretty astronomical for the period. The original cost of the production was believed to be $150,000 in 1928. Again, by today's numbers, it would be astronomical, probably more closer to almost $1 million. Upon publication of the book, Hall became known as a celebrity of the metaphysical movement that was sweeping the country during the Roaring *20s. Right away, he became the new Wonder Boy of the movement. He was celebrities wanted to read his books, famous writers wanted to read his books, politicians, leaders in business, agriculture, they all wanted to read his book. The book was considered an underground publication during the stay. During that time, it was more underground. It wasn't, you couldn't buy this in a major bookstore, basically. John J. Pershing, I don't know if people are familiar with him. He was commander of the American forces during World War I from 1917 to 1918. He was also a brother Freemason. He was one of the first prominent, well-known figures who purchased and praised Hall's accomplishment. He was in attendance at the book party, which introduced Hall's book to the public. Another person famous during that period that was, reading his book and purchased his book was publisher William Randolph Hearst and the Crown Prince of Sweden. They were also two people that were interested in his book. William Randolph Hearst was a famous newspaper publisher during that period. And I'm sure a few of you have seen that famous movie, Citizen Kane. Some say the greatest movie ever made, produced, directed, and starring Orson Welles, portraying William Randolph Hearst. And it wasn't a positive portrayal by no means, but that movie was based on Hearst's life from a controversial, if not negative slant. The full title of the book is, and get this, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolic philosophy, being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories, and mysteries of the ages. And this, to the day, this is still the most definitive publication of this genre. Along with the beautiful color plates, it was profusely illustrated with over 200 black and white drawings. And I'm going to go through the images here, a little emphasis on the images. In the upper left, we have the front piece of the book. As you can see, the font of the print is very traditional and very kind of antique. I mean, it was kind of, for its age, for its time, it gave the book to be taken serious and prominence. On the left, I think, is Saint Germain, the famous philosopher that kind of appears through the ages to motivate people to keep on the search of spiritual truth. On the right, you have the three chiefs of Solomon's Temple. And once again, I'll say their names because this is public. You can get this on Google. King Solomon, Hiram Atyre, and Hiram Abiff, which has great significance to us Masons. This is explained in his chapter 16 of Secret Teachings called the Hermetic Legend. And it goes over the whole legend of Hiram Abiff in detail. And to me, that's a very important read for Masons if you haven't read it already. Now I'm going to go to the images on the bottom. The image on the far left is a copy of the paperback edition, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And this was during the mid to late 70s, probably early 80s. It's the large paperback. I have this is the first copy of Secret Teachings I had. This is the book, the exact book I purchased in 1990, and I still have it today, along with about 10 other copies of Secret Teachings of all ages, of all shapes and sizes. On my right here, you have the famous Hermetic, I guess you can call him God, Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. Right there, he has his left foot on the serpentine god of Typhon. He's defeating Typhon. In his left hand is the wand of Caduceus, which is also the staff of Hermes. It symbolized diligence and prudence. That's how you conquer evil, through diligence and prudence. Again, it's Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. It's who was actually the author of the Emerald Tablet, which was probably authored by several Hermetic philosophers. But of course, this is symbolism, and Thoth Hermes is symbolically giving the authorship of these Hermetic writings. And here is a quote from Secret Teachings of All Ages, which is probably my second favorite quote from Manly P. Hall. When the mob governs, man is ruled by ignorance. We saw that not too long ago at the Capitol. When the church governs, he is ruled by superstition. And when the state governs, he is ruled by fear. Before men can live together in harmony, understanding, ignorance must be transmuted into wisdom, superstition into an illumined faith, and fear into love. And that basically says it all. I mean, if we are to be a civil society based on these higher principles, that's what we have to do. We have to transmute those exoteric forms of our lower nature into something higher. And that's what Manly was emphasizing throughout Secret Teachings of All Ages. Return to the ancient wisdom of the ages. Now we get to the Philosophical Research Society. The Philosophical Research Society was founded in 1934 to promote the study of the ancient wisdom, religion, and philosophy. It includes a research library, a lecture auditorium, and esoteric bookstore. The library houses over 50,000 volumes of rare books and manuscripts. And in 2001, an accredited university was added to PRS. So you can go there and get an accredited degree in consciousness studies. It is an accredited degree. It's not like a mail order degree. It is respected. And it can be used for a career in psychology and things like that. So his place now is an accredited institution, which he wanted to be. He wanted to be a school of higher learning. Hall purchased the property in which PRS was built in November 20th, 1934 for a mere sum of $10. Now remember, this property is prime Los Angeles real estate overlooking Los Felix Boulevard and the hills leading to Griffin Park. So think about that. It's right on the corner just before you go to Griffin Park and the Greek Theater. And he got this whole area, which is a big area where this place is, for $10 back in 1934. Ground was broken at the property on October 17, 1935. At that time, it was a field in which grew wild mustard plants. During that period in northern Los Angeles and also San Fernando, it was all orange groves and olive groves and peach groves. It was farmland. There was farms. There wasn't any city, or it wasn't a metropolis like it is now. LA grew into that. LA was just basically located in a small downtown area. The first cornerstone at the place was laid at an exact moment just after midnight to coordinate with the stars aligned for maximum longevity. And apparently that worked, because it's still around today. It's still functioning today. The style of the building was Mayan Egyptian Art Deco. Very beautiful style, and that's how he wanted it to look. He imagined the buildings to look like the ancient buildings in ancient Atlantis. He wanted to be like ancient Atlantis, where the first mystery schools were located. Amongst the collection of books and artifacts in the library was a copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead from 500 BC, Babylonian and Chaldean writings on clay tablets, Chinese oracles inscribed on human bones, and the original works of great philosophers, authors, and poets, and sacred writings of almost every religious doctrine, past and present. Hall started giving weekly lectures from the auditorium starting in 1959 to 1990, just about 2 weeks before his death, on topics such as secret societies, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, mystic Christianity, alchemy, tarot, Kabbalah, and Eastern religion, and theosophy. Each lecture went for 90 to 120 minutes and ended abruptly, as if Hall was a channel for the Akashic records. When he was giving his lectures, he would go for 90 minutes nonstop. He would stand up, just stand there, look dead into space, give his lecture, and then all of a sudden, after 90 minutes, he'd say, "Well, I think I'm out of gas now. That's about it." And then he would just, walk out and leave. And people were in awe, and they were hanging out after they're talking about the lecture. Occasionally, he might stay and talk to a few people and take questions, but usually he left and went home right after the lecture. The inscription on the cornerstone in front of the lecture auditorium, and that was put in there in 1959, says, "Dedicated to the truth seekers of all time." After his death, a portion of Hall's rare alchemy books were sold to keep PRS financially solvent. PRS, and I'll go more into detail at the end of this presentation, was very in financial problems. In fact, it almost closed down, and all his works almost were sold off to private investors. Luckily, it was saved and is still there today. Right now, his alchemy collection is currently showcased since 1995 at the Getty Museum and is available for public viewing. One of the things, deals was made that the private investor that bought the alchemy collection would agree to keep it at a museum or a public area where the public could come and see it, because that's what Manley would have wanted. He could own them, it was his, but he had to display it publicly. He couldn't have it hanging in his house for ego purposes during parties. So basically, he agreed to that, and that's where they're displayed today. And you can see them now. When the Getty is open after the pandemic, if you ever have a chance to visit the Getty, see that exhibit is phenomenal. And now I go to the final major publication, in my opinion, that Hall wrote, called "The Secret Destiny of America." And it's very profound. It has a lot of significance concerning the United States. It was published in 1944 during Americans' involvement in World War II. Now, remember, in 44, World War II was winding down. There was no doubt that the Allies were going to be victorious. It was on Germany was basically being invaded. Japan, they were depleting their natural resources, and it was only a matter of time where they fell. So Hall at that time, and before that time, actually, when we were first involved in the war, knew that when this was over, America would have a new role in the world. They would be the big kid on the block, and they would have to be an example for the world to follow. So he wanted to publish this book showing how we were the chosen destiny for the world, and what we must do to uphold that destiny in that respect. And that's when he started writing this book. He started writing it in 1942, actually. Hall presented a well-received lecture on this topic to a capacity-filled audience at Carnegie Hall on December 2nd, 1942. And that was just a few days before he decided to write it. At first, he was just going to give a lecture because he felt motivated and drawn to give the lecture because he felt it was important. But then after he gave the lecture, it was so well received and people wanted to hear more about it. And people even suggested you should put this in book form. And at this time, Hall was still at his peak. And he was the number one person in Los Angeles esoterically was being followed. So basically, he decided at that point to put it in print. Now, this is something a lot of people don't know. President Ronald Reagan quoted frequently from this book. And I'll get more into that shortly. In this book, and I'll get more on the book. In this book, Hall alleges that there was a secret school of philosophers that they had created the idea of America as the country of religious freedom and self-governance. And this was, we're talking back in the 1600s, that this school of philosophers, perhaps the Rosicrucians, had a dream that they wanted their philosophy carried forward into a form of government. And they wanted the ancient ideals and the mystery schools of the ages behind the founding of this new country or this new world. And basically, that set the premise for a country. The New Atlantis, which was a book that you can, get from iBooks, I think is actually free. The New Atlantis, written by Francis Bacon, and what Sir Walter Raleigh talked about, the secret societies such as the Freemasons were behind the founding of the Republic. So basically, the New Atlantis was written, I think in the late 1600s. And basically, it was about this New Atlantis in the West. And remember, at that time is, Columbus discovered the United States in 1492. In the 1600s was a time the first people were settling in Virginia and the colonies. And basically, Bacon thought that this land was fertile for this belief. And like Philadelphia was one of the first major cities which welcomed all religions in the world with tolerance and acceptance. So basically, before that time, Francis Bacon had this vision in the New Atlantis. Of course, George Washington, Ben Franklin, Paul Revere, John Hancock, etc., were all Freemasons, and a sizable portion of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution were also Freemasons. These philosophers felt the United States was based on the ancient ideals of the ancient wisdom, and influenced by Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. And obviously, when you think about it, since a lot of the Freemasons were involved in the founding of a republic, that stands to be true. Then there's an interesting story here. There's a story of a mystery man. When the founding fathers, when they were going to sign the Declaration of Independence, they were fearful of it because if it failed, they would be executed. And they didn't want to put their name on paper at the time and make it easier to round them up. So basically, they wrote up the Declaration of Independence. It was very easy to write because that was their ideals and their concepts, what later became America and what we love so dear. But they were afraid to sign the document. So they were debating about it back and forth, Jefferson, Hancock, Adams, all of them. So all of a sudden, there was a guy in the back of the room, a man that nobody really knew. He looked like a stranger, and he stood up and he said, "What's wrong with you? You are on the beacon of destiny. What you do will determine where our country, where this land is going, and will influence future generations, and will have a dream that people will live in, and it will be the beacon of the world." So anyway, and he did it with much more passion than me. He stood up. He was a great speaker with oratory, and he just spoke, and he commanded respect. And all of a sudden, they all got motivated, and they rushed up to sign it. John Hancock was the first, and then the others followed. So then after they signed it, they were doing what we would call today the high five and everything, and they were all happy about it, and they felt relieved, and they felt rejuvenated and reinvigorated, and had a life in them, and that the revolution was going to happen, and they were going to win it, and they had this ideal country that was going to be created. So they were going to go and thank this man. So this man, they looked back there, they couldn't find him. So they started looking all over in the corners of the room, and then there was a closet that was, but it was locked. But they went in there anyway. Of course, he wasn't in there. They even looked outside, walked down the halls. One of them went outside. There was nobody there, and so that was. And then this mythology became known, and like I'm saying, it was spread from the colonial days, from the revolution, and it was carried forward as through oral tradition. And it was finally, I forget who originally put it down, but somebody did. But Manly P. Hall got a hold of it, and Manly P. Hall started talking about it, and he talked about it in this book. And so go to 1981, July 4th. Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980, and July 4th, 1981. Parade magazine, not a book of esoteric reading. It was pretty commercial. It used to be in your local newspaper. It used to have a TV guide with it and all that. And so they asked kind of a conservative publication, kind of like a Reader's Digest, so abbreviated form. So they asked Ronald Reagan if he would write a piece for them on what July 4th means to me. So he wrote a piece, and he started about his childhood and his father and, seeing fireworks and growing up during that time in Middle America and all the great barbecues he went to as a child and everything, and how patriotic he was and loved his country. So then he started talking about this story in this article. And then people would ask him later, when he would go and lecture years later, when he became a politician, years later, during his time, you talked about earlier, I'll get to that. But during this time, shortly after 1981, when he was talking in going to places and speaking before groups, they asked him, that was a great story you told. Where did you hear that story? So Manly P. Hall said, well, he said, a philosopher I was close friends with told me it. So all of a sudden, they said, well, what was his name? And I guess he didn't want to give it at that time because, it was the esoteric, some call, i.e. the occult. So basically he said, well, I kind of forget now, but, I remembered the story pretty well, and I thought it was worth telling, at least for symbolical and allegorical purposes. So anyway, but then they found out when they did research, that wasn't the first time he told that story. He told it when he was a pitchman for General Electric before his groups, when he talked about America and the destiny of America. He also he mentioned, America's assignment with destiny, which Manly had a book published later about that. And also he talked about that in Secret Destiny of America. He used that term. And also a city upon a hill. To be fair, that's also in the Sermon on the Mount. But Manly P. Hall did use that term too. So we'll go to a little bit later on their connection, Ronald Reagan and Manly P. Hall, because they did have a connection. They did know each other. Right now, I want to put emphasis on the attachments here. On the left, you have a modern book form of the Secret Destiny of American paperback. Again, this is available in a very affordable paperback. And now they also have it with America's Assignment with Destiny, which I was talking about a few minutes ago. You can get it very affordable for about $15. Or if you go to iBooks or Kindle, you can get it for about $2-3. Right here is a flyer for his lecture, December 2nd in 1942, The Secret Destiny of America, before he actually started putting pen to paper and writing the book. As you can see, the seats are very affordable, $130, best seats $220. On the right, I have another ticket or flyer to his presentation. This was after the book was published and he was doing his tour. It was in San Francisco on Geary Street at the Scotch Rite Auditorium. Scotch Rite Auditorium no longer is in that location. That was January 20th, 1944. And on the right is a copy of the original ticket to his first lecture when he first talked about the Secret Destiny of America on December 2nd, 1942. Now I'm going to go over other notable works by Manly P. Hall. Lectures on Ancient Philosophy in 1929. That's books on your bottom right there. That was a book that was kind of like a supplemental book to Secret Teachings. It's well worth purchasing. You can, again get that digital, very affordable. And it basically puts a little bit more emphasis on some of the aspects of Secret Teachings. It's not as comprehensive and extensive, but it's well worth reading. And it's one of his notable books, I think. It's well worth purchasing and reading. This book on the top left is Freemasonry of the Ancient Egyptians. That is a book on ancient Egyptian Freemasonry. At that time, they didn't call it Freemasonry, okay? But it was a precursor to what we do, and the rituals are quite similar. He talked about that a little bit in the Lost Keys of Freemasonry. So it goes into the deep study of the Freemasonry of the ancient Egyptians. Um, and it includes all their magical and initiation rites. Another book not shown here is How to Understand Your Bible. That is the esoteric interpretation of choice verses of the Old and New Testament, what things mean esoterically. A very good read to supplement your regular Bible, and it adds richness to your regular Bible. Masonic Orders of Fraternity, 1950. That was a book, and that is on your bottom left. That was a book that was basically more of a chronological history of the Masonic Order. It's not that esoteric. It's more of a history lesson. So if you're in the history of Masonry, of course, it's a little dated because it was written in 1950, but it's the general history of Freemasonry. America's Assignment with Destiny. That's like another Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's a little bit more practical and historical. Secret Teachings is a little bit more philosophical. This book is a little bit more practical with historical dates, but a well worth complement to Secret Teachings, and that was written in 1951. And The Phoenix, written in 1960, probably his last major book. And what that does is that goes over all the important seekers of esoteric wisdom, including Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, Max Hindle, those people that were instrumental. Even Aleister Crowley, I think, is in there. The people that were instrumental into the survival of the esoteric ancient wisdom. And the journals of the All-Seeing Eye, Horizon, and PRS Journal. The All-Seeing Eye was a newspaper he published at the Church of Truth. Horizon came a little later when he first started at PRS, Philosophical Research Society. Then the last few years in the late 80s and 90s, late 80s and early 1990, he did the PRS Journal, which had, esoteric articles that he wrote and chosen articles from his major writings. It wouldn't be complete without covering his spouses, his significant others. He was married twice. Hall's first marriage was to Fay B. de Ravine on April 28, 1930. She was only 28 at the time of marriage and had been Hall's personal secretary during the preceding 5 years. She's on your left there. Manley is with her. Manley, of course, looks like, screen idol from the silent film era, like a Barrymore or Laurence Olivier. Like it was Hall's first marriage and Faye's second. She was an attractive, petite 28-year-old astrologer from Texas. So she shared esoteric interests, just like Manley. They were actually married at the Rosicrucian Fellowship in Oceanside by Max Hindel's widow, Augustus Foss Hindel, and she administrating the vows during the wedding. So she married him there, right there, in the near the chapel there. Faye suffered various illnesses, and she grew jealous and angry at Manley after his popularity soared with the publication of Secret Teachings. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of their marriage. And a tragedy that happened with that, she committed suicide in 1941 at the age of 38. It was pretty tragic. She parked her car at the rear of a theater near their apartment at Vermont Avenue, 1st Street, and she stuck one end of a garden hose into the exhaust pipe of her car and the other end into the car's passenger compartment, then rolled up her windows and started the engine. Stayed there a few minutes and died. She was found later by a man walking his dog who called the police, and they contacted Manley. Manley kind of was a little cold and aloof during that time about it. He never really mentioned her again in his life. I think he was a little bitter. It was a kind of a rocky road marriage, but Manly, he was a great teacher and everything, but nobody's the same. Some of the people even blame Manly for her death. Not that he did it, but that he drove her to it because he didn't really show her the attention she needed. But anyway, right once she died and was buried, that was basically the end of it as far as Manly was concerned. His second and final marriage was to Marie Scheitweichert Bauer on December 5th, 1950. She would have now. What's funny that this was a better marriage, but it was a rocky one to say the best. And she stayed with him for the rest of his life. She had what some would call a slightly split personality. She was 5'2", a beautiful woman, had black curls. She's right there on the right on the picture. Beautiful eyes. She had a infatuation for big jewelry and flashy outfits. She was a talented and thoughtful woman who challenged business executives and religious leaders to improve the role of women in the workplace. Now, this was 1950. She was ahead of her time. She was like a feminist for that period. And some of the men there who were still in the good old boy network and his foundation couldn't really handle her too well. And they didn't understand it. But, today she would, fit in perfectly to the way the world is today. She could be self-centered and superstitious and sometimes loudly domineering in conversations in the room. She considered herself an artist. She had visions associated with historical, esoteric, and occult figures like Saint Germain and Francis Bacon, and called her art, she did divine geometry. Some of her art, I think, is still on display at PRS, by the way. She did have a nervous breakdown after she freaked out at a gopher snake that got in her daughter's way when she was taking her daughter with a walk, and she bashed it to death and had a nervous breakdown. She required weeks of hospitalization. She received what she believed to be, after she came out of the hospital, she received what she believed to be veiled messages and casual conversations with strangers from which she believed to be from secret societies, which had special plans for her. She had a quest covering several years searching for Sir Francis Bacon's buried vault called the Bruton Vault. And what that vault was supposed to do is have blueprints for a utopia, which she was supposed to be the leader of. It sounds a little wild. This had eventually led with an encounter with the FBI. What happened is she went to brother of Freemason, J. Edgar Hoover's, whether you like what Hoover was about or not, but he was a brother Freemason. But anyway, it ended up, she showed up at brother J. Edgar Hoover's office demanding to meet with him. And Hoover departed special agent to her. And remember, this was during the Red Scare. So he was a little paranoid about where she was coming from with this. Who are these people you're talking about? And he started thinking, is she a red? Is she a communist? She started, and Manly was the last thing he wanted to do was have the House of Un-American Activities start investigating him, right? So, because he was into the esoteric, and he called it, and that still was avant-garde. So anyway, she was that ended. What happened is she took Manly on a wild goose chase, and he went on it to kind of satisfy her. And she wanted him to dig right near the Capitol, to have this group of people excavate the area in the Capitol, searching for this vault. Manly kind of played the game a little bit and said that he had a revelation from Saint Germain telling him that was about 20 miles from the Capitol, located in this field somewhere, and that they should dig there. So she believed it. So they went out there, and he knew probably nothing's gonna be found. So they started digging, and finally she gave up on it. She was born in Germany at the foothills of the Alps to a devout Roman Catholic family. And like I said, she stayed with Manly up until the end of his life, and she transitioned on April 21st, 2005. I'm going to cover some celebrities and politicians that Manly P. Hall was close friends with, and you'll be surprised on some of them. Does any brother know who this is? Okay, this is Brother Burl Ives. Ives was an actor and folk singer. He was a member of the New Christy Minstrels, which was a folk group back in the 50s and early 60s. He was very active in Freemasonry with Hall. I mean, they went to lodge together. They were good friends. They went to both Scotch Rite and Blue Lodge together. And the two couples, Manly and Marie, and Burl and Dorothy was Burl's wife's name, they remained good friends throughout the years. Ives and um, his wife, Dorothy, were both active metaphysicians. So both of them were into the esoteric. They were seekers. In the early days, both men partied together a lot. Burl had a liking drinking Jack Daniels, and Manly enjoyed red wine. So that was their choice of poison, and they enjoyed each other's company. They both had the belief that secret societies were behind the origins of the United States, and that the mysterious French Count Saint Germain was also a part of this movement of the United States. Of course, like I said, Saint Germain, his real name was unknown. He did exist, but he's known to reincarnate through different times of our history. Um, this next person was a very close friend of Manly P. Hall, too. Does anybody know who this is? Okay. The hint is, I want to suck your blood. Okay. This was Bela Lugosi. And this is a photo of Bela Lugosi being married for the 5th time in Hall's home on August 23rd, 1955. Lugosi was 72, and his new wife, Hope Lingiger, 39. He passed away approximately a full year later. Lugosi and Hall shared a love of classical music, opera, comparative religion, and believe it or not, stamp collecting. Hall was actually a spiritual mentor to Lugosi and tried to assist him in kicking his addiction to morphine and methadone. I don't know if many people know that, but Bela Lugosi was addicted to morphine, and he actually, they say during the time he made Dracula, he was addicted to it. So it didn't stop him from his most famous role, but he was an addict. He actually had to go to detox for, I think, 90-day period to get the monkey off his back. But he did have that problem. He actually got the addiction when he started taking morphine. When he was prescribed for his sciatica. During that time, they prescribed morphine for something like sciatica. Of course, today they don't do that. They do physical therapy, and if they do medication, it's another form. It's not. It's mostly physical therapy and acupuncture for sciatica. Now, everybody knows who that is, right? Okay. That is, of course, President Ronald Reagan. Now I'll go into the story about Ronald Reagan more. Ronald and Nancy Reagan both had been dabbling in the occult for years with actress Eden Gray. I don't know if you've heard of Eden Gray, but she was a writer on the Tarot and a silent film screen star. She started losing fame a little bit when talkies came, but she had a pretty respectable body of work in the silent film era. She wrote a critically acclaimed book on the Tarot, and it's still in publication. I recommend it to those of you who are in the Tarot. It's called A Complete Guide to Tarot, and basically it's a good book. I mean, it really covers it. It's not pulp. It's not new agey. It's a very deep study of the Tarot. And also, Reagan was a friend of Jeannie Dixon, who was a famous astrologer of celebrities. Of course, you've heard the story that Reagan, Nancy had a Ronald Reagan's astrology chart done. So they knew that days and times it was best for him to meet with foreign leaders and also make important political decisions. So they were involved, and they hung around with that group in the 50s, when he was an actor in the 40s. And also Manly P. Hall. He was known to visit PRS one time. His limo, when he was governor of California, was sighted out there. And people were asking, yeah, who's that important person? And it was discovered it was Reagan, and he was in with Manly P. Hall, meeting with him briefly. He also looked at the big bookstore. He, purchased Secret Teachings of All Ages. So he was kind of not a novice to this type of study. Another person was Sam Yorty, Mayor Sam Yorty. a lot of you probably didn't grow up in Los Angeles during the 1970s. I did. Mayor Sam Yorty was the mayor of LA from 1961 to 1973. And he had a special ceremony for Hall, naming him as a valued citizen of the community of Los Angeles, and presented him with a plaque at City Hall on August 5th, 1970, for 50 years of distinguished service as a lecturer, author, and teacher. He actually attended Hall's lectures at the Church of Truth since 1927, but he kind of kept a low profile because he didn't, he was in politics and he didn't want somebody to use it against him politically, that he was into the occult or witchcraft, or worst case scenario, Satanism. So basically, he kind of kept a low profile so that people that wouldn't understand this didn't know about it. Another person was Goodwin Knight, and he was Goodwin Knight was the governor of California from 1953 to 1959. That was before my time. I was born before 1959, but I wasn't, in California at that time. He was actually a trustee at Philosophical Research Society. He was also an avid astrologer and kept a secret file of all his friends and foes in relationship to their political involvements. So basically, he would know, how somebody, how the chart was for them that day, and whether he should meet with them on that day, when he would have the political advantage. Glenn Ford, actor Glenn Ford, famous film noir actor, famous for the movie Blackboard Jungle, which featured the debuts of two great actors, Sidney Poitier and Vic Morrow of combat fame. Ford was a friend of Hall and one of the favorite movie stars, come out strongly in the belief in reincarnation astrology. So Ford was deeply into the study of reincarnation astrology. If you ever get to see the movie, The Brotherhood of the Bell, as a Mason, see that. It's kind of comical and it's kind of surprising because Glenn Ford was a brother, Freemason, and he stars in it. It's kind of like almost a nefarious look at Freemasonry, but it's kind of campy to look at and kind of enjoyable. So if you ever get a chance, it's on YouTube for free, so it won't cost you anything, just about 90 minutes of time. The other person that knew Manly P. Hall, and this was not a celebrity or politician, but it was an astronaut, Edward Mitchell. He was a NASA astronaut who was the sixth man to walk on the moon. He piloted the Apollo 14 lunar module in 1971. And during that time that he was coming back to Earth, he looked out of the portal of the spacecraft to the Earth and had an epiphany that the entire universe was a conscious, intelligent, and loving. And he felt, when he had this awakening, the spiritual awakening, he felt, I'm looking at that globe there. There's no lines of division. Why are we doing this in this world? Why aren't we, being brothers to each other and sisters to each other? So he went on a spiritual quest, and that eventually led him to PRS and the writings of Manly P. Hall. And he got so involved in it, became a friend of Hall, and he was elected to serve on the PRS Board of Trustees in 1974. Mitchell actually, in the front of the Reader's Edition of Secret Teachings, he has a quote there about secret teachings of all ages. And he says, Manly Hall's great work is a classic in the world's literature. It will guide historians, philosophers, and lay seekers of esoteric wisdom for centuries. So he was a big student, a big fan of Manly P. Hall. Now this next person everybody knows. It's the King, Elvis Presley. Presley was a longtime fan of Hall, and he also owned a copy and reader of Secret Teachings. Presley also studied the writings of Blavatsky, Hindel, Pike, Gibran, and Yogananda. I saw a picture of Presley's library at Graceland. It's still restored. People that tour it see it. And a lot of the books he has there, I have in my library, and I'm sure it's the same books you viewers, attendees tonight to this lecture have in your library. He owned an autographed edition of Hall's Secret Teachings. In the 1960s, he sent his girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, Priscilla, to PRS to attend one of his lectures, hoping that she would eventually develop an interest in the esoteric. Unfortunately, she left the lecture bored of tears, and that was the end of that. So Elvis Presley, also another one, Gloria Swanson, star of Sunset Boulevard, and a famous health food fanatic and friend of Hall who had a well-known interest in metaphysics. And a couple more here that there wasn't room to include. Helen Keller, famous Helen Keller, knew Hall and was an avid fan of his writings and a devout theosophist. Frank Lloyd Wright, Hall lived in his spectacular Mayan-style house designed by Wright. And Wright visited the Halls once in their home and heard he was modifying the home and didn't like that. So he visited. And I don't know if they got into any esoteric discussion. I think Hall was just a little worried that his house would be altered. Luther Burbank, the city of Burbank in California, near Greater Los Angeles, is named after him. Hall was good friends with the famous botanist. They shared an interest in Hermeticism and the ancient lost continent of Atlantis. Of course, Luther Burbank also was famous for getting Yogananda here. He was a sponsor of Yogananda and his teachings. John Denver, Rocky Mountain High. John Denver read Hall and occasionally visited the Philosophical Research Society. And infamously, this person, which a lot of people would shock you, Osama bin Laden. He read Hall and occasionally, he read Hall, was fascinated by Hall's writings. A copy of Secret Teachings was found at bin Laden's hideout when the Navy SEALs invaded his compound in Pakistan on May 2nd, 2011, and executed the Al-Qaeda leader. He also, sidebar, he also had some marijuana plants in his backyard. Bin Laden, he was fascinated with conspiracy theories that involved the Freemasons and the Illuminati. So he's probably reading it from that perspective. Maybe not that he agreed with it, but he wanted to know what was up or if there was anything up. So basically, that's how he got involved with Secret Teachings of all ages. I'm going to go into the twilight years of Manly P. Hall. Hall's prominence in the Southern California esoteric and occult community started to wane in the 1960s and 1970s. During that period, Hall felt like he wasn't going to be remembered. He felt that his writings would be, stored away in some dusty warehouse or ancient forgotten building somewhere, and no one would ever know about him, and he would be just a footnote in history. Because during that period, 1960s, 1970s, there were other writers that were becoming famous. I mean, you had, the Self-Realization Fellowship was becoming famous. You had Carlos Castaneda. He was becoming famous. There was Course in Miracles, things like that younger people were, going to. And he was kind of a little old school during that period. He was maybe a little too waspish for people's taste during that time. So basically, he was starting to lose his popularity, knowing a lot of people visiting his place were elderly people, older people, people not, in their 20s and 30s. At that time, he started becoming influenced by holistic healers and New Age medical practitioners during his senior years. He did a very memorable presentation to the Los Angeles Scotch Rite in 1990. It was one of his last lectures. In fact, maybe his last lecture is outside of PRS. It's online. You should, when you have a chance, you should Google it. If you Google Freemasonry in the New Millennium, Scotch Rite lecture, March 25th, 1990, it will come up. And basically, Hall talked about what we're experiencing now, that in the future, he saw there was going to be a pull in this country between some elements on the extreme right and some elements in the extreme left. And basically, the middle reason would start to be lost, and the country could, he feared, ultimately collapse. And he called about Freemasons to restore that equilibrium, to restore that balance, not do anything radical, if you will, but what you do in your community, what you do with your church, what you do, just in your communication with your family and with your friends, stand for that medium, get that medium advertised, and to the nature of balance, because that's equilibrium is where you can think logically and reasonably, and that's what he thought we needed to strive for. And he saw the future; it could go either in one direction or the other, and it would be the end of democracy, is what he feared. So, if you ever get a chance, tune into that lecture. He also talked about the environment, about the natural resources being depleted. And, this was in 1990, and he kind of saw that happening. He transitioned on August 29th, 1990, and there's controversy surrounding his death and the events leading up to it, and I'll go into them. They were highly suspicious. During this time, a 51-year-old self-proclaimed Oriental priest who claims that he was a descendant of the Atlantean priesthood met Hall at a 1985 fundraiser in Santa Monica. He went to one of Hall's lectures during that period, and he was enamored with Hall, started talking to Hall, and Hall, got to know him and kind of liked him and invited him down to PRS. So, for one of his lectures, and he would talk with him later and possibly, have lunch with him or something. He was this guy was a formal banker and computer salesman who was involved in New Age marketing, including renting isolation tanks and colonic cleansing treatments. So he believed in cleansing of the colon to get out all the impurities and restore and maintain health. And that's basically, Manley kind of believed in that, or else got led to believe in it. And he started doing those. It kind of weakened him. He would, and this person, although he called himself a doctor, was not an authentic medical practitioner. I guess you could say a quack. And he was in dire need of financial assistance. He was kind of a predator, kind of a con man, if you will. And in 1987, he talked Manley into signing all his checking accounts and credit cards, that he could be a signer on all Hall's checking accounts and credit cards. And Hall was very trusting. And there wasn't enough people at the time basically watching out for him. And he got victimized by it. And he used the accounts to not only to pay Manley's bills, but to cover his own expenses. And he built, additions to his house, went on trips, fancy restaurants, all that. And he screened all of Hall's visitors and acted as his official caretaker. So basically, he isolated Hall, so he couldn't maybe see people that could wake him up to what was going on or see what was going on. And he only allowed Hall to see people that wouldn't be suspicious of his intentions. He also promised to make Hall a big star during the dawn of the digital age. We're talking about the late 80s. Personal computers were just going out. The internet was in its very infantile stages. It was in its infancy. And basically, he was basically convincing Hall to, have faith in him. He was going to digitize all Hall's products, which are being done now, but he was talking about doing it back then. Hall started paying him a salary of $3,000 a month, and he became a member of the PRS management team. He started getting more and more involved in the management of everyday activities there. They also invested $200,000 of the Hall's money into his scheme to market colon cleansing equipment and an air purifier device. Of course, that was just money that never took off into fruition. And the colon cleanses were taking a toll on Hall's health. Also, this person's son was assisting him in caring for Hall. So they were kind of like a father and son tag team. And then on August 23rd, 1990, Hall signed a new will and living trust that listed this person as one of the beneficiaries, leaving his estate, property, bank accounts, treasury bills, gold coins, and stamp collection to PRS. But remember, the beneficiary of PRS was this guy that was his caretaker. Now, his wife was left out of having power over the money, but she was got to live in their house for the rest of her life, but was not granted title to it. So she didn't. The PRS owned the house, but she could live there. this new will superseded the one Hall signed in 1970. Now, 3 days after Hall signed the new trust and will, the doctor took Manley on a drive up towards Santa Barbara. He called back at PRS and said that the car overheated and he couldn't make it back from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles. So he said he was going to park on the side there and they were going to spend the night there. So the next morning he drove into Manley's driveway at his house. One of the neighbors saw Manley in the car and waved to him. Manley didn't look back and he looked ashen, his face. And the man went in and told his wife, "Man, I just saw Manley, and Manley looked like a corpse out there. What's going on? He didn't look well at all." So anyway, that night, the caretaker put Manley in his bed, and he was controversial. He called and said he thought Manley died, but then later he backtracked and said that Manley was sick. So he had conflicting. The information was a little conflicting of what he gave. When they came to investigate, they noticed there were a swarm of ants on his headboard, and Manley was kind of sunburned. And the ants weren't the ants that were around LA. They were kind of ants from the high desert. And the thing, one of the stories that this guy came that he found Manley collapsed in the backyard tending to his garden, but a neighbor saw him pull up in the car. So there was a lot of conflicting evidence. So the board and the wife had the police department look into it, and the police even exhumed Manley's body, but the case stayed open for about 5 years. But then they closed it that it was inconclusive. So that's the way it stands. After that, PRS was in severe financial problems, and there was legal fights over the money. Luckily, they came out on top. They did lose that alchemy exhibit collection, but they mainly came out more or less unscathed, and PRS still survives today. The two con people, they died within 2 years. The father passed away with complications associated with HIV, and the father passed away from a heart attack. So they both passed away within 2 years after Manley died. Today, PRS appears to be stable, and it's back in solid financial ground. So that's a good thing. The influence Manly P. Hall had on esotericism, Hermeticism, and Freemasonry. Hall is regarded as one of the top classical Masonic scholars of all time. He is rated second to only Albert Pike in the September 2018 issue of Fraternal Review. I'm sure some of you, especially you brothers, have read or do read Fraternal Review, great magazine, published by the Southern California Research Lodge. He's second to Albert Pike. I like Manley better. I think Manley's more readable, but that's a debate that we can have. And anybody that defends Albert Pike, I understand it, how they can say he was the top one, but they're interchangeable. But I would go with Hall personally as a top Masonic scholar. His signature magnum opus, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, is still respected as the definitive work in this genre. It has single-handedly brought many seeking further light to petition for initiation into our sacred fraternity. There's also two other things that I'll mention here about Manley. He also he co-authored a murder mystery that was turned into a screenplay, which he does the introduction, called When Were You Born? And it's basically it's a murder mystery. And the suspects are based on the two astrological signs. It's on YouTube for free. Of course, it bombed at the box office. It's not a Godfather or Citizen Kane by any means, but it's there. If you like Manley, it's there on YouTube to read to view at your leisure. as far as I'm concerned personally, Manly's writings have meant a lot to me, specifically A Secret Teaching of All Ages and Lost Keys of Freemasonry. Led me to realize in my heart that I was already a Freemason, and led me to complete my destiny and make it official by petitioning for the Blue Lodge degrees, which later led to the Scottish Rite, and still my involvement in Freemasonry. I'm be active for the rest of my life until I go to see the great architect in the universe. So basically, that's what it means to me. I'll close with this quote from Manly P. Hall, his fine to close it up. Though the modern world may know a million secrets, the ancient world knew one, and that was greater than the million. For the million secrets breed death, disaster, sorrow, selfishness, lust, and avarice. But the one secret confers life, light, and truth. And that concludes my presentation on Manly P. Hall. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you so much, Brother Robert. That was absolutely phenomenal. This is probably one of my favorite talks that I've seen on Refracted Light.
Thank you, brother. That coming from you, that's a high honor.
Yeah, I usually tout my own stuff, but yeah, you definitely take the cake today.
I mean, you and Brother Johnson. I want to say a little pitch for you guys. What you guys have done for Freemasonry, along with the other esoteric brothers that are part of Refracted Light, you guys have brought it to a new level. I'm glad that specifically a lot of you younger brothers, you are in this and you are searching for the real traditional truth of Freemasonry. When I joined Freemasonry back in 1991, I was a lone wolf, and it was kind of a lonely place out there. But I'm glad you guys are here, and I'm glad I'm a part of it, and I want to continue to be part of it. And God bless you guys.
No, and God bless you as well. Like I said, it probably took a little bit of long time, but you definitely found a lot of like-minded friends and brothers. And I'm so glad we have something like Refracted Light where we could meet. You and I didn't know each other until Refracted Light. So,
and I'm referring other esoteric I know to your site.
Yeah, no, a bunch of them right here tonight. So I will open up the floor for questions. I see some folks have unmuted themselves. Robert Johnson did have a couple of questions that I did want to ask, but he had to take off because I want to know the answers. Okay, so I'll ask the top three and then let you rip with them, and then I'll shut up and open the floor. He asked, why do big name Masonic historians stray away from Manly P. Hall? And let me mute some folks here. And then the next question is, do you think he was murdered? And the last question was, who came up with the idea of Initiates of the Flame first, Manly P. Hall or Heindel?
Okay. Why do some Masonic leaders shy away from Hall? Is that the first question? If you can repeat them.
Why do big name Masonic historians shy away from Manly P. Hall?
Well, because I think one of the reasons is Manly actually didn't only focus on Freemasonry. I mean, as you see, he was involved in basically the whole smuggling of the mystical teachings. I think some of the leadership is a little worried about the esoteric and what some may call the occult. I think, and don't get me wrong. I mean, we need the leadership, and they're all brothers. God bless them. But I think that there's a fear of that making us not appear too mainstream, and probably lowering the amount of people that will apply to Freemasonry out of the fear that it's a cult. Because fundamentalist Christians, they accuse us of that daily. I don't think there's any fear because we're just speaking truth, and I don't see anything that delves into that from his teachings. I mean, there are some real, what you would call left-hand path, dark teachings out there, and I don't see Manly P. Hall being that. And I think a lot of it's concerned with numbers. They want quantity instead of quality. I know you and we've talked about Brother Martinez. I think me and you are on the same sheet of music. We want quality. If we have if we had even half the amount of brothers we had, and we all were on this path that we all here are on, that would satisfy me. So basically, I'm personally against these one day. You go from, assembly line initiations, you go from an entered apprentice to a 32 degree in less than 8 hours. I mean, to me, that's not masonry. And I know people that have gone through that, and then later when they get involved in the real deal, they tell me that they missed out. They wish they were able to go. You go to Europe, they take years to become masons in Europe, and it's a little harder to even get into masonry in Europe. So basically, I'm glad you guys are there and we're returning to our roots.
No, great answer. And so now the doozy, do you think he was murdered?
I don't want to kind of quote for sure I know he was murdered, but it is very suspicious. I mean, the police did investigate it and he was exhumed. I just think that maybe the evidence was too dated, and there were some, maybe the police just want to wrap it up after a few years, and Manley was older. It wasn't like, don't get me wrong, all life is sacred, but it wasn't like he was 25 years old. So basically, I think it's a very subjective issue. I don't want to say for sure, but highly suspicious. I think I'll safely leave it at that. And the other question, you had one more.
Oh yeah, it was did Manly P. Hall or Heindel come up with the idea of Initiates of the Flame? Who came up with it first?
Well, I have a friend here that is a member, Larry Jolson. He might want to speak up on this. He's associated with the Rosicrucian Fellowship. I read a lot of the writings of I'll ask him. Is he on mute? Maybe unmute him.
Larry
Jolson. Yeah, Larry, you're kind of the expert on this as far as Max Hindle is concerned. Of course, as you know, I read a lot of his works too. But the question was from Brother Johnson, if Manly P. Hall or Hindle was the originator of the Initiates of the Flame. I think Hindle had another book that was kind of close to that title, right, Larry?
I can't respond to that. I don't know.
I think he did. I don't know what year it was published, but I can. Brother Martinez and Brother Jolson. You're not a Mason, but I consider you
right.
My brother. I could probably do some research on that and look at the dates. And there was a book called The Initiate or something by Hindle. It's not popping in right now, but I can research that and reply on Refracted Light on this lecture site.
Fantastic. So the floor is open, folks. Feel free to unmute yourselves. Don't do it all at once, and knock yourselves out.
Joe, I have a question, Brother Robert.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. So Manly P. Hall, at the time he published Secret Teachings of All Ages, there were a lot of things in the book that were not really accepted by academia. It took really decades for a lot of this stuff to be generally accepted. In a way, Hall was kind of like the Graham Hancock or Robert Bauval of his time, where he was, putting forth these ideas, and academia was like, no, that's not right. And a tremendous amount of that research, it's not likely that he would have come across that information in just a public library or just general knowledge. So is there any indication where he got a lot of this amazing information from?
Well, see, that's a very good question, because to tell you the truth, I don't have a definitive answer on that, because the official story is he did all his research in all these great libraries, and also he did travel abroad, and he probably had firsthand experience. I mean, some of the other great seekers and teachers of the time, like Max Hindle and Paul Foster Case and Blavatsky, they said the secret masters communicated with them. Now, that is a little etherical and esoteric, okay? And I'm kind of a practical person. So that's what I liked about Manly P. Hall, because he never claimed that, okay? But, I don't really rule it anything's possible. Maybe there is, the so-called ascendant masters that communicate with people they want to keep on this wisdom. Maybe that's where Manly Hall got it, because I agree with you, brother. I can't really find it. Now you go to him now, and you go to Hindle, and you go to Paul Foster Case, you find this stuff. And Blavatsky, I think a lot of it came from Blavatsky, who published it earlier. And then you get to the point, well, where'd she get it from? And then you could, of course, a lot of it was in the Library of Alexandria was destroyed. Who knows what we missed out there, right? So, and that's a fact that did exist. So basically, it's that esoteric vein. And I try to get practical and not believe in the hocus pocus. But your answer is probably just as good or better than mine. What else could we conclude? Like I say, I'm highly suspicious.
Okay, I appreciate that. That was an honest answer.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. If I did, I'd be the new guru for the world.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think anybody knows the answer. I've asked that many times to people who are intimately familiar with Hall and the Philosophical Research Society, and no one knows the answer to that. I've even asked Mitch Horowitz and some other people who are very, intimately knowledgeable of Hall.
See, we got the answer from them. We got the answer from them. That's where we went. Okay, they were our, I guess, secret chiefs, so to speak, right? We went to them, but where did they get it from? See, that's the next answer, and that's almost like an unanswered mystery, really.
Brothers and friends.
Yes.
I've talked to people much more experienced than me along the path. And one of the things they told me was, the more you read, the more things start to fit together.
Okay.
Any one source might not have all the answers.
I agree.
But as you begin to piece things together, you get your own insights.
I agree, my brother. I think that we should all, that's why I call myself a seeker. I don't really, I guess if I had to label myself with what philosophies I follow, I would say Theosophy, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry. Of course, the first would be Freemasonry, and maybe New Thought thinking. They're the main four philosophies that are kind of like my four main philosophies that give me my foundation. But I'm a seeker above and beyond that, because, as they say, the man that says he knows the answer doesn't know the answer. And I believe that if I knew the answer, I would be the answer, and I would be able to answer all this for everybody. And I don't know the answer, but that's what keeps me on my path. It's the lost word, right? So that's what we're in search of, and all of us here tonight. And that keeps me going. That keeps me in this. I believe reincarnation. Personally, I believe reincarnation. So basically, I believe I've started on this path. I know I'm probably I'm going to come back in some way or form, in some reality. But once you're on this journey, I think you stay on this journey. And of course, then there's the temptation of left hand or right hand. And, you look at Star Wars, there's a lot of spiritual significance there. The question was asked to Lucas, who was the adept? Because they know Campbell, the Campbell Foundation is a big, Joseph Campbell, when he was alive, was a big fan of Star Wars, a good friend of Lucas. Who was the adept? Well, right away, people will say Yoda, or they'll say Luke Skywalker, or they'll say Han Solo, or they'll say Princess Leia, or somebody, even Chewbacca, or somebody obvious. But you know who the adept was? The adept was Darth Vader. He was the spiritual adept, and he took the left-hand path. So he was the one, he was the chosen one, and he ended up to be the evil one. So it's kind of interesting how that works,
Also, can you hear me, brother?
Good evening, brother. We talked on Facebook.
I just want to make one comment about the source of all the information. Don't forget that in the Second World War, a lot of things happened, and the Nazis took almost all the information from Freemasonry,
right?
Okay, and they keep it on the vault. And then the Russians, after the war, also took all that information. So there's a lot of information that we don't know what it is. Okay, so don't forget that.
And a lot of it was oral tradition too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So before it became put down on paper, it was oral tradition, and only the adept had it. Freemasonry basically, if you're seeking it, you will get the knowledge. But you almost had to be of a royal bloodline years ago to have that oral tradition to be qualified to receive it.
Also, one last thing. Remember, brothers, Troy Wages, he got the full Illuminati ritual because the Russians released that information. So this happened recently. And that's only one thing that we should find again.
Right. It's all, yeah, you're right. It's, we got to stay open-minded on the sources, right? And, but what's good is the wisdom's out there for the seekers. And I know we're all seekers here tonight. I personally cannot get satisfied with religion. And don't get me wrong, I respect people that have religion. It makes them good people, right? It makes them follow the path and their path. And the exoteric rituals, which with no understanding on what that ritual means or what's it mean, what's the Garden of Eden really stand for? Was the serpent, was that really evil, or was that wisdom in the garden? Is the tree of life and the tree of knowledge both the same tree? I mean, you start looking at these questions and you start seeing there's more than meets the eye. The Jesuits in the early Catholic Church didn't want the Bible available to the lay person. And although I disagree with that, they might have felt that the lay person didn't have the intelligence or discretion to be able to interpret it and could use it for dangerous reasons. So there might be some truth to that. As Freemasons, we got to keep our tradition going. I think that our country needs us right now to restore equilibrium, and we got to stay loyal to our oath and our obligations to our country and to each other.
I agree, brother. Like what you said about the oral traditions. Alexandria the Great, he was an initiate of the mysteries, and they called him the barbarian philosopher.
Socrates was his teacher, his private teacher.
Yes, exactly.
Aristotle.
Aristotle, yeah. He wrote him a letter because he thought that Aristotle was divulging the mysteries. He claimed that he was saying that only the way your books, the way you write them, it should only be for ones who were initiated. And Aristotle wrote him back. He says, yes, it is published, but it's also unpublished. Because what he's saying,
there's a deeper, just like Masonic symbols, they're veiled in allegory, right? So there's a deeper meaning to the symbols.
Exactly.
There's a deeper meaning to being raised from the dead, right? In the Bible, Lazarus was raised from the dead. How do we know that was an initiation ritual?
Exactly.
Okay, so there's deeper mysteries. And when you start getting into this, brother, and I'm sure you fully agree with me, these mysteries start getting unveiled to you. And it's kind of like you're not even consciously trying to unveil them, but then all of a sudden everything clicks.
I agree. And what we was talking about Manly P. Hall, Matt's question. I know he hung a lot out with Nicholas Ruick. And Nicholas Ruick was part of the mysteries as well, deepening the mysteries, especially some Rosicrucian ties to it. And yes, he did learn a lot from Matt Heindel as well. Right. It is said that he actually predicted John F. Kennedy's, the incident of John F. Kennedy. He read his birth chart. He said that something's going to happen to that man, but yeah, I mean, he was a really, really well-read man. And one question for you that I think no one has asked is, I know that he was obtaining money from a great aunt of his. That's how he got all the books, because his family, I think it was a gas or some kind of company for oil. And his aunt said to him, I would take care of you whenever you need something. And that's how he was getting money and traveling the world and obtaining all these esoteric and rare books and manuscripts.
Yeah, well,
I don't know if you knew about that.
those two sisters I talked about who were actually his benefactors, and they were supporting him. But he did, like you're saying, brother, he had other wealthy benefactors that wanted to keep these teachings alive. Back in that day in this country, the businessmen back then were very esoterically, like Carnegie and them. They were also very into esoteric study. Edison was a theosophist and a Mason, and so was Tesla. So they were into this, and it's almost like we kind of lost some of that. We kind of, the greed has taken over, our culture, and the tradition that would make it that if I'm a successful businessman, I don't have the response. I don't screw my workers. I take care of them like they're my family, right? Right. But that doesn't happen anymore, and so, and if we want to return to the golden age, we got to start doing that, man. With equality, back in the day, back during that day, they didn't have equality, of the sexes and of the races, but we can go back to that tradition, but have equality with it. You know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah, and I know that he obtained he learned from many interesting people during his lifetime, traveling the world. He talks about his grandmother.
Right.
He talks.
She was like a spiritual guru to him, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, who was a big influence to him. I think he wrote a book on it about his grandmother. Correct?
Yes, he did, and I think that's available. I think Memories of my grandmother, something like that. It's a small book, and he goes talking about her and his mother. Even though she wasn't responsible, she had that spiritual current. You know what I mean? Because she was a seeker in her own right, and she was, for her time, she was a very kind of liberated woman. She didn't go to those Victorian extremes. Like somebody told me one time, a friend of mine. We're talking about Aleister Crowley, and I'm not, to tell you the truth, I'm not a big reader or fan of Crowley, okay, but he did put out some good works, and he's, Crowley was supposed to be bankrupt morally and everything, and he's supposed to do things against society, and he said, well, remember back in the 70s how you partied? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that was Crowley in the Victorian times. And that's why it looked so bizarre that time, because, he's going to parties. He was, he wasn't following the Victorian norms, and he was out of step. So probably if he grew up more in modern times, he wouldn't be that crazy. But I'm not a fan of his writings, though, because I think he kind of swayed from the true Hermetic path. In my way, he got a little too much trying to create his own religion and everything. But but I have friends in the OTO. I have a lot of friends there. So
I agree. I know that Manly P. Hall kind of subliminally shot at him in some of his works a little bit.
Well, yeah, he did. But you know what I heard, though? I have a friend that's in the Hermetic community too. He's got his own order. He told me that he knew Manly. And he told me that Manly, he would go on his private back and he would have that book of magic he put out, Manly P. Hall, and the book of magic that Aleister Crowley put out, that famous book, Magic in Theory and Practice, the one I'm talking about, and he would have that in the back room. So he would read it once in a while. So he just didn't want it out there. So he looked at it a little bit too. So, and there's Magic in Theory and Practice has some good elements to it. I'm not saying it doesn't, but.
And there was a competition back there. There was Crawley, there was Manly P. Hall, there was Harvey Spencer Lewis, there was Paul Foster Case. It was like the occult golden age at the time.
It was the golden age. It would have been a great. Well, brother, you're younger than me, but the 70s was like a modern golden age of that stuff too during the 70s. But yeah, you're right. It wasn't a occult golden age, but I think we're on the brink of another one. I think we're about ready to go there.
I agree.
I think the world needs it, and you brothers are what the world needs. I'm just so glad I united with you. I didn't have anybody for a long time. There was a few of us, but we were kind of rare. Like I said, when I first became a Mason, I brought secret teachings to work. And two of the guys that I work with, they look. One guy took it home. He comes. I told you, Brother Rodriguez, about this. Brother Martinez. They came home. They came back with it, and they go, "Oh, don't be reading that. I said, why? He goes, that's not Freemasonry. Stay away from that stuff. And I said, so talking about what color we paint a bathroom, that's Freemasonry.
I still hear that today. Don't you worry about it. So it's like you said, it's a good thing we found each other. Any other questions? I know we're short on time. Anybody have any other questions or comments for Robert? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
I was just going to say, Brother Robert, fantastic presentation. I
Thank
learned
you,
a lot.
Thank you.
I've always been kind of a fan of Manly P. Hall myself, and I joined Freemasonry in 1988. Little bitty country lodge out in the middle of Missouri, and my father and granddad were Masons, and I brought home I went to college the following in fall of 1989, and in the college bookstore I found a copy. I think it was the reader's edition, maybe, of Hall of Secret Teachings of All Ages. And so I was reading it, and I brought it home with me over the weekend, and I was reading it, and I was showing it to my dad.
Good stuff, right?
It just opened my eyes, and I said, Dad, did you know this? I mean, my dad had been a Freemason his whole life too. And he says, that's not Freemasonry. You shouldn't be reading that kind of stuff.
That's black magic. That's Satanism. Yeah.
He wasn't even doing that. He's like, that's not Freemasonry. He didn't even like Wilmshurst. He thought Wilmshurst was a little weird. So
Wilmshurst is pretty good. Wilmshurst, he has an esoteric current. He's right.
Oh yeah, I love Wilmshurst. He was another one of those guys that I got a hold of in the 1990s. That just kind of opened my eyes. But thank you very much for this. You've really,
thank you for being here, brother.
Really done that. Great.
And thank all you brothers for being here. And Brother Martinez, this will be, I guess, posted on YouTube or.
Yeah, it'll be available on Facebook at the minute we all hang up, and then I'll have it on YouTube by tomorrow. So, folks, if you're a Mason or not, feel free to share it with your lodges, with your groups. If you have any questions for Brother Robert, he is a regular on Refracted Light, so feel free to hit him up. If you're not Facebook friends with him, do so immediately. He is a wealth and a breadth of knowledge.
Thank you. So. And I'm working on another presentation for us. It's going to be on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Woo! All right, that's enough. That's enough awesomeness for one evening.
Yeah, okay.
I can't take any more. But yeah, we would love to have you back on. You are always welcome here. This was absolutely phenomenal. It really was. Yeah, and if so, with that, I'm going to stop the Facebook Live, and let me do that first. And goodbye, Facebook. So if anybody has any other questions, I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes, and then we will all bid our adieus to Brother Robert.
I have a quick question. I think early in your presentation, you had mentioned that the grandmother had access to a Masonic library that Manly had accessed. How?
Well, she had books by what I mean Masonic library. She had books by Blavatsky and books that Masons would read. Okay, and he tapped into that knowledge, and Mackey, the older Masonic writers and philosophers, and he started reading those books, and that's what kind of first got his taste of Freemasonry. Is that a picture of Manly you have in back of you there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Yeah, okay, good. So you're an avid fan of Manly P. Hall too, I see.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah. So that's how he got introduced to it. And Blavatsky had a library too. That I think her father was a Mason in Russia, and he had a library there that she started reading from. That's how she got into these teachings. And she was kind of like a person. That's another lecture I'm thinking of too, the Blavatsky and the Theosophical Movement, because there's a lot of information there on, because that was basically the launch of this esoteric current, her in the United States, when she started the Theosophical Lodge, her and Alcott in 1875 in New York City. And then Manly, she kind of was influential in his path. And like I say, I consider myself a theosophist, but I'm kind of a seeker. That's part of the dimension of me, but it's not me. I kind of don't like to get involved when some group tells me, well, you can only read what this person wrote, and sometimes even the most esoteric progressive groups do that, and that's when they lose me. Well, that's one good thing about Hall. I met the librarian that worked for him back in the 90s before she died. And we were talking about that. And she said, well, why do you have to stop with any teacher? She said, you're the teacher. You teach and you help teach others. Don't stop with any teacher. Then you stop growing. Then you stop evolving, and she was right, so that's why I tried.
Brother Robert, thank you for the presentation. It was great.
Thank you, brother.
I don't want to bore everyone else with this, but I would like to try to get your information and talk to you offline. I'm in Sojourners, the Veterans Masonic group.
Yeah.
We would love to get you to talk to our group. Just give a brief presentation if you're ever willing to do that.
I would love to do that, brother. Love to do
great.
It. Now, how should I contact you through?
I just friended you on Facebook, so
you just friended me. Okay, good.
Yeah. If
good.
not, I'll bother Joe for your information.
Okay. No, you friended me on Facebook. That's good.
Yeah, I tapped Joe to do a presentation for us this summer too, if he remembers. But
I don't. But thank you for reminding me.
We said July, but I'll bug you again about it soon.
Excellent.
But yeah, Robert, I just wanted to maybe give a brief presentation. I think the guys would get a kick out of it. I mean, of course, if you go too esoteric with some of the guys in Sojourners, you might.
Okay, well, we'll touch base before I do it. I want to know my limits. I can break it down into two. I did it last night. I did it for my home lodge. I did part 1 last night. I'm going to do part 2 next week. I can do it in 2 parts if you want that way.
Great. I'll talk to you about it. I don't want to bore everyone or take up anyone else's time.
Maybe we can exchange phone numbers too. We'll
great.
Talk.
That'd be awesome. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else with questions, comments, concerns, gripes, bitches, moans, handshakes, pats on the back?
I just want to say great presentation.
Thank you, brother.
Wonderful. Joe always brings the heavy hitters.
Joe's a heavy hitter.
Yeah, he is a heavy hitter.
I've been after Robert and I got together 2 weeks ago to get a little tease of his presentation because he'd never been on Refracted Light before, and within 5 minutes I was so excited for tonight. I was super jazzed, so I cannot wait to see what you come up with next. You are a fantastic speaker. There was stuff. I'm a Manly P. Hall super fan. Like my wife always knows what to get me for Christmas.
Yeah.
You just got to go to the PRS website and, you can't lose. But yeah.
20th copy of Secret Teachings, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could always use a couple more copies of it. It came in different sizes. So, I definitely learned some things about him that I had not realized before. So this was great.
I have a question. There's a book on his life called The Master and the Mysteries. Have you read that one?
I read that book. That's a good book. PRS is going to put out a new book. PRS is going to put out a book this year on Manly P. Hall's life biography, and they're also going to release some unpublished works of Manly P. Hall.
That would be. Yeah. I mean, that's what they do, right? They. I think he did more than 8,000 lectures, and they make his lectures into pamphlets.
Right. And they're going to put him a book for him. Plus, brother, well, I don't think he's a brother. I wish he would be, but Mitch Horowitz, have you listened to any of his lectures online?
I think everybody
love Mitch.
Yes, has heard Mitch. So
yeah,
little
I'm
tip,
sorry, Joe.
No, all I was going to say was they helped give us some swag bags for Esotericon, the PRS. Fantastic group of folks. They told us some little secret tidbits about some stuff that's never been published before that should be coming out this year, I guess, depending on, COVID and all that stuff. But there's going to be some new stuff that they've never published before for the masses. So those are going to be awesome.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. I can't wait to check that one out.
Esotericon's coming up, brother. Is that going to be soon?
Yeah, we should be announcing soon. I know it's a little bit later than normal. We're gonna announce in the next couple of days. We have all the speakers, we have the venue. We are either going to do, hybrid depending on COVID and vaccines and all that stuff, or we're just going to do all virtual like we did last year, which was great. I mean, we had almost 300 people tune in. So, but don't want to take away from your evening. But yeah, we'll announce in the next couple of days.
Okay, count me in. Sounds good.
Right. Awesome. Well, does anybody have anything else?
I was just going to say, there's a guy that I know that he's a Blabowski. He's a writer of most of Blabowski's biography. His name is Michael Gomez.
Yeah, I heard of him. I think I read one of his books. Yeah, he also put out abbreviated copies of Isis Unveiled and Secret Doctrine, right?
Right. Yeah, I know him. He's part of the Theosophical Society. He owns like a one of those metaphysical stores called Quest Bookshop.
Quest, yes, Quest.
Yeah, Quest, yeah.
They're a famous bookshop. Yeah, I've bought books from them before. Yeah.
Yeah. He's
And
usually there, so yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I haven't met him personally, but I've read his works, and he's a great writer.
Yeah, he's great. He's
Have you read
a
The
great
Secret
speaker.
Doctrine? That's
Oh,
kind
wow.
of a hefty read. That's like
It took me 2 years to read it.
Oh yeah, well
because
that's good time.
yeah, it took me 2 years, but the trick is you have to buy a glossary.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, there's a Theosophical Society glossary that comes with
that's right. I have that in my library. Yeah.
Right. So that's why when I was reading it, I was able to kind of understand some of the terms you was using because of the glossary.
You just need a good 10 hours sleep before you read it. Come to it well rested, you know.
Yeah.
Well, good stuff. Well, ladies, gentlemen, brothers, sisters, thank you so much for coming tonight. Brother Robert, again, I can't say enough awesome things about
Thank you.
This
A pleasure to be here.
One of my favorites, bar none. So hopefully we'll see you back again. And for those of you who've not subscribed to Refracted Light, do so like right now. We got about a good year's worth of content and fantastic speakers like Brother Robert twice or 3 times a week. So if anybody has any questions that have not been answered, feel free to pop them on Facebook and somebody will get back to you. And again, Brother Robert, love you. Thank you. That was phenomenal.
Thank you, brothers. Thanks all. Thank all you brothers for coming. Thank you. And, pray for the best for our country and keep the faith.
Indeed.